Hey guys, welcome to Telling the Told and Untold. My name is Tshego. For today's case, we're going all the way to Port Elizabeth in the Eastern Cape. I should note that Port Elizabeth did change its name, but obviously at the time of this case, it was still known as Port Elizabeth or PE. So for the rest of this video, I will be referring to it as either Port Elizabeth or PE. So with that, let's go straight into today's case. On the 21st of April 2015, Jayde Panayiotou disappeared. I'm not too sure whether I'm pronouncing her surname correctly or not. I did try to find sources that would say both her name and surname, but that was a bit difficult, so I do apologize if I'm not pronouncing it correctly. Jade was a grade 7 teacher at Riebeck College Girls High School in Utenaek near Port Elizabeth. I don't know if it's like Utenaek or Eikdenaga, but I'm just going to say Utenaek because it's easier. Jade was married to Christopher Panayiotou. They met in 2004 through mutual friends, and a couple of years later, they got married in 2013. Christopher was a businessman. He owned the OK Grocer in Algo Park in Port Elizabeth, as well as the Infinity Cocktail Bar. I'm not too sure whether the bar was like a family business on his side of the family, like the Panayiotou, like the whole family, or whether it was just like his own business venture, but he did own the Infinity Cocktail Bar. So what happened that day is that Jade's friend, Siyoni, went to go fetch her at her home. So basically they just had like an agreement that either Jade would go pick her up that day or like Sharice would go pick Jade up, because they both lived in Port Elizabeth and obviously they taught in Utenaek, which is approximately 30 minutes away. So it was just like cheaper and they could just like save petrol if they just like took one car. So on the day in question, it was Sharice's turn to go pick Jade up. So usually what would happen is that Sharice would send her a message telling her that she's on the way, and Jade would just stand outside the complex gate because she did live in a complex. So on the 21st of April, Sharice sent Jade a message asking if she shouldn't just drive into the complex and collect her in front of her own house gate, because the weather that day wasn't that great, and Jade replied that she would just walk to the complex gate. So once Sharice got there, Jade wasn't there, and afterwards she called Chris, Jade's husband, to ask whether he knew where Jade was, because she wasn't waiting for her outside like she usually would be, and her calls and messages aren't going through. After this, Chris just replied that he thought that she had already gone to work, and after their conversation, Chris managed to open the electric gate. I'm not too sure how they got it open, or he could do it mobily, or what was the case, but the gate was opened and Sharice drove inside, just maybe assuming that Jade just decided to wait by her house instead of the complex gate. And she just couldn't find Jade. She was looking and she was nowhere to be found. And afterwards she decided to go into her car and just start driving around outside the complex and maybe surrounding areas, because she just started she had a really bad feeling, just to put it lightly, or in simpler terms. And then she started driving around looking for Jade, and during her own search she saw a police car and stopped the car and told them what was going on, and they too decided to join in her search for Jade. After this, everyone started joining in the search for Jade. Chris was a part of it, friends and family, and the police as well, which is why they were able to do their own police search. And because of this, the next day, on the 22nd of April, 28-year-old Jayde Panayiotou's body was found. Jade's body was found in an open field in Kwanobuhle, which is close to Utenaek. It was close to a gravel road which dissects Wincanton Road on the outskirts of Utenaek. The next day after Jade's body was discovered, they had to run a post-mortem exam, which is basically just an autopsy to determine what her cause of death was. It was determined that Jade had been shot 3 times. Jade was shot in her chest as well as in her head. It's believed that she was shot in the back of the head because the bullet came out in the front of her head. It's also believed that she was pistol whipped before she was killed. There was no evidence of trauma to her genital area, which just made police officers believe that this wasn't a sexually motivated crime. It's believed that the shooter was more than a meter away when firing at her head. The bullet penetrated her skull and brain, the chest involving the left lung, right lung, and her spinal column. There was blood also found in her lungs. The bullet went in at the back and came out at the front, one at a slight angle. The third bullet entered the left side of her head, and that caused bruising around her eye. And there was also a fracture to the surrounding bone. Jade also had unique identifying marks on her body. She had a watch on her left wrist. She still had her wedding ring on. She had tattoos, one on her shoulder and left flank, and she also had piercings. She had a belly ring, her ears were pierced, as well as her nose. So after the autopsy and a couple of days later, Jayde Panayiotou was finally laid to rest. But at the funeral, something strange did happen. Her husband, Chris, read her eulogy, and then it was discovered that he didn't write this eulogy on his own. He basically just read something that was entitled My Sweet Wife's Eulogy, which was written by Charles Atkin in October 2010. And when people kind of found this out and discovered it, they brought it up to him, and he just kind of said that it's because he was bad with words, and it just basically just resonated with him, that he just couldn't come up with his own words at that time. So from this point, I should note that everything in this case does happen pretty quickly, as you would have already been able to tell that Jade disappeared on the 21st, the body was found on the 22nd, and an autopsy was done on the 23rd. So already things are moving pretty quickly. 5 days after Jade's body was discovered, on the 27th of April, Captain Willie Mai, the head of the vehicle hijacking division of the South African Police Services in Port Elizabeth, received a call from an informant. Captain Willie met this informant, and after their discussion, he had his first suspect. This suspect's name was Luthando Siyoni, and he had his own gym. So after Captain Willie got this name from this informant, he then went to Luthando's gym to try and find him, and then he couldn't find him there. After this, he went to his girlfriend's house. His girlfriend's name was Babalwa Breakfast. I don't know if that's her actual name or an alias, but in court documents, she is referred to as Babalwa Breakfast. He couldn't find Luthando at his girlfriend's house, and after this decided to go to his place of work, and it just so happens that Luthando worked at the Infinity Cocktail Bar that was owned by Jade's husband, Chris. Luthando was then taken for questioning at the Kwanobutle detective officers alongside his girlfriend Babalwa, and they just went for further questioning because obviously he was their first and only suspect at the time. And during this questioning, that's when Luthando decided to tell them about the conspiracy to murder Jayde Panayiotou. According to Luthando, in 2004, between August, September, and October, Chris approached him. He was at work, and Chris approached him and asked him to if they could have a conversation. So they walked outside close to Chris's car, but they weren't inside Chris's car, and this is because there was someone else in the car. It was a woman, but this woman was not Jade. After this, Chris just kind of asked Luthando if he knew someone that could, and made a gesture, someone that could kill someone for me. And that's what Luthando got from that. And then he kind of just told Chris that he'd look into it and he'd find someone for him. And at the time, Luthando says that he didn't know who Chris wanted killed. At first, Luthando went to someone named Lama of Motherwell, And after this, he said he was interested. Chris and Lama met, but nothing came about from this interaction, their first meeting. After this, Luthando found another guy. He was referred to as Trompi in the court documents, and he too met Chris, and nothing came about from this interaction. After this failed meeting, and I think 2 more failed meetings happened after this, Chris started putting a lot of pressure on Luthando to find someone to have this said person murdered, and that's when he finally told Luthando for the first time that he wanted his wife Jade murdered. And he said that it had to happen before school holidays, and this is just because during like the school time, Jade's like life is more like in routine, like she wake up at a certain time, go to work at a certain time, come back at a certain time, and just the places that she go to are limited, as opposed to if they were to have her killed during the school holidays, because it just would be harder to locate her. After this, Chris told Luthando that he had 3 reasons why he wanted Jade killed. The first one is that apparently he worked really hard for really long hours to earn the money that he earns, and Jade would basically just like go spend it, and he didn't like it. The second one is that like he had car issues. Apparently he had to sell his Renault Megane. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it, but he had to sell that. And then after that, he had a buggy, and this buggy had issues, so he went to go get it fixed. And after he got it fixed, he sold it for about 50,000 rand, and for him that's a financial loss. Also, I don't know much about like cars and stuff, but I know that once you buy a car, like just depreciates in value. So I'm sure 50,000 rand isn't like a lot of money for like when you sell a car for like a buggy. I don't know, but I don't think it's like that much. And the third reason is that apparently either Chris's parents or Jade's parents were pressuring him to buy a new home for him and Jade, and he didn't like that either. So these were the reasons that he told Luthando that he had to have Jade killed. She just, basically, for him, basically was just about saving money, and his wife was a money problem. So by now we're in February 2015, and this is when Luthando met someone named Sizwe Vuma Zonke, and apparently he heard that Sizwe knew like some guys that would be able to carry out the hit on Jade. So he met up with Sizwe, and Sizwe agreed to this plan, and they exchanged numbers. So after this, Luthando showed Sizwe all the places that he could find Jade, like possible places that like he could like kidnap her and then take her and have her killed. And then all of a sudden, around the beginning of March, Sizwe disappeared, and Luthando was back to square one. At this point in time, Chris was just panicking, because for him he finally had someone that would have his wife's murder like carried out, and now this person just backed out, and he was just putting a lot of pressure on Luthando. And after this, Luthando met up with someone else, they agreed, and then just like the 5 other people before, this person also pulled out. And this is when Sizwe decided to contact this is when Luthando decided to contact Sizwe on Facebook and just try to get him back in on the plan. And this is when he told him that the amount that he would receive is 40,000 rand if he does carry out the hit. And then Sizwe told him to just like send him his numbers again. And a couple of days later, they got into contact, and Sizwe said that he had 2 guys that would carry out the hit, and just like that, everything was back in action. So the 2 guys that Sizwe had contracted to do the killing, they wanted to hire a car. They wanted to hire like a small white Toyota. I'm not too sure which one, because I think it would just be easier for them, like for the car not to be linked back to them. And this would cost 6,000 rand. So after this, Luthando got 3,000 rand, Chris got 3,000 rand, and together it made 6,000 rand, obviously. And then they gave it to the guys, and they were able to rent a car. When they rented this car, this was around the beginning of April, and schools were just about to reopen after Good Friday, like that Easter weekend period. So the plan that they had all come up with is that on one Sunday night, Chris would come with Jade to the Infinity Cocktail Bar, and they would come in Jade's car. And afterwards, Luthando would show Sizwe which car is Jade's. And at the end of the night, Jade would go back to her car, and they would just follow her, and then like get to like a remote area and then do the killing. But apparently that plan didn't go through because Jade didn't go to the bar that night. Apparently they had tried like 3 other times, and all those other times failed. Another time after schools had opened, Sizwe and the guys went and they tried to get Jade as she was waiting for Charisse to come pick her up, but the weather that day wasn't that, like, it wasn't the greatest. It was just like raining, so they couldn't go through with it. And at this point, Sizwe was just like frustrated, so he told Luthando to tell Chris that they should just do it at his house, and he should just give them like the keys so they could just go straight to the house and do it when she's home. And Chris said no, they can't do that because number one, they live in a complex, and number two, their opposite neighbor was a police officer, so it just was very risky and they couldn't do that. This is when Chris just suggested that they should make it look like a kidnapping or a robbery, just something along those lines. And then the following Tuesday, Luthando got a phone call from Sizwe at around 8 a.m. and then Sizwe told him that the job had been done and he wanted his money. So basically the arrangement was that Chris would leave the money at the Infinity Bar with someone named Knox. I'm not too sure who Knox is because this is like the only time I saw his name ever brought up, so I don't think he plays, like, he doesn't really play, doesn't have much of a role in this case. But yeah, so Luthando went there to go get the money, and apparently Chris hadn't left the money with Knox. So he says while he was like with Knox, kind of like wondering what to do with the money, or like, you know, how they're gonna pay Sizwe, that's when he saw on Facebook that Jade was missing. And then he called Sizwe and told him that, okay, I just saw now that she's missing, so now I know that like you actually did the job. I'm gonna try and get in contact with Chris because the money isn't where he said he would have left it. And then he didn't want to call Chris because he just didn't want any like telephonic links between the two, which is also a bit like weird because obviously they would like communicate before, and he also worked for Chris, so now like you guys just don't want to like have any contact with each other, which is also just a bit fishy. It's a bit dodgy. So eventually during the day, Chris managed to call Luthando, but the conversation couldn't last that long because at the time he was at the Infinity Bar and there were people around him, so I'm assuming it's around about the time they discovered that Jade was missing. So it's just like friends and family that like are worried and are at the bar, so they didn't speak for that long. And later that night, when Luthando was back with his wife Babalwa, Chris called. He met up with Chris. Chris gave him a bag that had money in it. He then gave it to his girlfriend, Babalwa, and then he left with Chris. He then returned to, I think, his girlfriend's house because his girlfriend was still at his house. Then he called his girlfriend's brother and asked if he could drop Babalwa off at his home. And then she came with the money. They counted the money that was for Sizwe and it added up to 40,000 rand. I hope that whole part of them like meeting makes sense. I hope it makes sense. So that was basically Luthando's story. So the two men that Sizwe had contracted, their names were Sinethembe Nenembe and Zolani Sibeko. So the reason I didn't mention their names in Luthando's story is because Luthando didn't know them by name. He just knew that Sizwe had contacted 2 guys. I think he had like seen them, but he had never like really gotten to know their names. So now police officers, I think they released Luthando because they didn't really have much to like go on at the time or much evidence, but they were watching both him and Chris. And during the investigation and then like watching the two, Chris and Luthando like met up, and in the car they had like a camera set up as well as a microphone so they could hear their conversation. So Luthando basically gets into the car and he's telling Chris that, the police officers are searching his house and he just wants to disappear and just like run away from PE and hide out for a while. And this is when Chris told him that like he must stop calling him. The police are tracking his phone, and like Luthando must just like break his SIM card, throw away his phone, and they just mustn't be in contact. I think there is footage of this online, so I'll try and put it in right now. And I'll also put the link down in the description in case you guys want to watch the full thing.
But why the police after you? That's what I don't know. I think there's an informer somewhere, somehow. Did these guys flip? Which one? Your friend. To let them do it outside the house and take the bags and the rings, and then they didn't take the watch or anything. They just left everything there. You see, so it looks like a hit now. So they're after me, and that's why I can't meet you just like this in front of people, Thando.
During police's investigation into why Chris would want to murder his wife Jade, they discovered that Christopher was having an affair. I hope you figured it out by now. Chris was having an affair, and her name was Chanel Coutts. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it properly. I'll put it down here just in case. And they had been having an affair for approximately 3 years by the time of Jade's death. And apparently Chris's parents found out, and they were upset and threatened to disinherit him if he doesn't stop this affair, and Chris just continued it. The second thing is that Chris was in debt. He had applied for a 2.2 million rand loan, and it's just believed that he was just tired of supporting both Jade and Chanel. So because of that, he just wanted to get rid of one of them, and it just happened to be Jade. It was also discovered that Chris would also buy his girlfriend a lot of things, would buy her bags that cost 2,000 rand, would take her to expensive hair salons to get her hair done. She just got the whole princess treatment. And it turned out Jade didn't get that. Jade's diary was found, and there was an excerpt from the 21st of September 2014, so a couple of months before her passing. So basically it said, "I'm jealous when I see other people living the life I so desperately long for. I want a normal life, a husband that comes home at a normal time, has a normal job, and makes time for his wife and family. Somebody that doesn't hide me or cover up, always respects and put his wife first." Jade's friend Cherise also told police officers and the court that Jade just wasn't happy because Chris was working all the time, and there'd be nights where she wouldn't change out of her work clothes because she wanted Chris to see her in her normal clothes, and so that they could just have dinner together. So just from small excerpts of Jade's diary, you could just tell that at the time their marriage just wasn't the greatest and she wasn't happy. On the 5th of May 2015, Christopher Panayiotou was formally charged with the murder of his wife Jayde Panayiotou. Sizwezake Vumazonke unfortunately passed away in hospital in September 2016, and because of this he never got his day in court. The two people he contracted, however, did. Sinetembe Nenembe was sentenced to life for murder and an additional 15 years for robbery. His partner Zolani Sibeko was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and was sentenced to 15 years. Christopher Panayiotou was charged with murder, conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, robbery with aggravating circumstances, and defeating the ends of justice. He was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of his wife. Luthando Siyoni, who is now 37 years old, is actually expected to appear in court this month, which is the month of May 2021, which is years after Jade's passing. So he's finally going to stand trial for his part in Jade's murder. Apparently, during the whole court proceedings that they had back in 2017, he was described as a hostile witness because he just wouldn't answer questions and just basically just had a lot of attitude. On the 8th of December 2017, Christopher Panayiotou's lawyers applied for leave to appeal the sentence, and the request was heard on the 17th of May 2018. However, the judge denied Christopher's application for leave to appeal. He then tried to appeal in Bloemfontein, but to no avail. As of now, Christopher Panayiotou is serving his sentence in St. Alban's prison near Port Elizabeth.